What is intuition and how do we follow it in our decision making? You've probably heard phrases like trust your gut. I just had a feeling. Something inside me just knew. But what exactly is that? Is intuition just emotion? Is it experience? Is it something spiritual? Or is it just a fancy word for good guessing? The fascinating thing is that depending on who you ask, you'll get very different answers. Scientists, everyday people, and philosophers will describe intuition all very differently. And I actually think those perspectives together give us the clearest picture. So let's look at intuition through those three lenses: what scientists say about intuition, what people experience as intuition, and what philosophers and spiritual teachers have said about intuition for centuries. Before we dive in, if you're just joining me here in this video, this is the last segment of our series this week on decision making, including looking at it from our logic, our body, our emotions, and now finally our intuition. So if you're curious about some groundbreaking perspective shifts and powerful tools, you really don't want to miss out on the other segments. Now let's start with the scientific perspective on what intuition is. In psychology and neuroscience, intuition is often described as fast unconscious thinking. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls it System 1 thinking. This is the part of the brain that operates automatically. It's fast, effortless, and constantly scanning the world for patterns. Your unconscious mind processes, on average, 11 million bits of information every second, while your conscious mind processes about 40 to 60 bits per second. Take that in. 11 million unconscious versus 40 conscious. That's why we often hear that we only use 5% of our brains and the other 95 is devoted to processing unconscious thoughts and information. And when new information converges with something your unconscious mind deems meaningful, the brain produces a signal. Not a paragraph of reasoning, just a signal, a sense of knowing. Researchers sometimes describe this as a kind of rapid internal simulation. Your brain quietly runs through past experiences, emotional signals, and environmental cues, and produces a conclusion without showing you any of the math. Which is why intuition often feels like, I don't know why, but I just know. Neuroscientists also believe intuition is connected to something called the default mode network in the brain. This network becomes active when we're not focused on solving a problem. I've had some of my most profound realizations or greatest ideas when I'm dozing off at night or driving in my car or showering, and of course, I've nowhere to write down my ideas. And it turns out I'm not alone. So when we're walking or showering or driving or just letting our mind wander, neuroscientists say that that's when many people report their clearest insights due to this default mode network. The brain is still working in the background, connecting dots beneath the conscious awareness. And then suddenly the answer surfaces an aha, a realization, a quiet clarity. But those are some of the leading scientific explanations for intuition and how it presents. Now let's look at how people actually describe intuition in everyday life. If you ask people what intuition feels like, the descriptions tend to sound something like this: it's knowing something without knowing how you know. It's a sense of inner clarity, even when the outcome is uncertain. It's that quiet voice beneath the noise of overthinking. Many people also notice that intuition tends to show up most clearly in situations where logic kind of struggles, when information is incomplete, when the future is uncertain, or when the decision involves people and meaning or values. In those moments, intuition often feels kind of like the internal compass. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not an alarm system. It's steady. And interestingly, people often say that they didn't lack intuition, but they ignored it. You hear this all the time in hindsight. I knew something was off, or I had a feeling I should have done that, or I ignored my gut, which suggests intuition isn't something we're trying to invent. It's actually something we're trying to hear more clearly. Now let's take it one step further. Long before neuroscientists and psychologists ever tried to measure intuition, philosophers and spiritual teachers were talking about it. And their language sounds a little different. They often describe intuition as inner wisdom, or a form of knowing that arises when the mind becomes quiet. In many traditions, intuition is connected to the idea of a higher consciousness. Some suggest something mystical or metaphysical, but some describe a deeper layer of awareness that exists beneath the constant chatter of thought. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote, "The heart has its reasons, which reason doesn't know." Many spiritual and contemplative traditions describe intuition not just as pattern recognition, but as a form of inner guidance that arises from a deeper layer of consciousness. In these perspectives, intuition is sometimes understood as the part of us that's connected to something larger than the individual mind, what some traditions call the higher self, universal consciousness, or the wisdom of the soul. Mystical traditions across cultures have described intuition as the quiet way that truth makes itself known when the thinking mind becomes still. Some people interpret this as guidance from spirit guides or divine intelligence, while others frame it more philosophically as the moment our individual awareness taps into the collective intelligence of one interconnected consciousness. Regardless of the language used, the common thread is that intuition emerges when we quiet the noise of analysis and fear, creating space for a deeper form of knowing, one that feels less like figuring something out and more like remembering something we already knew. And when you put all of these perspectives together, science, lived experience, philosophy, and spirituality, a really interesting pattern emerges. Logic helps us analyze possibilities. Emotion helps us understand what matters. And intuition often tells us what feels true. So, if that's what intuition is, how do we actually listen to it? I'd like to end this segment with a simple reflection exercise that you can try right now or come back and revisit later. Think of a decision that's currently on your mind. It doesn't have to be huge, just something you've been thinking about. Now, before you try to solve it, I want you to imagine setting the decision down on the table in front of you. And let's ask yourself a few questions. First, what happens if I stop trying to force an answer for a moment? If I let the question sit quietly in my mind for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, what do I notice? Maybe you can offer it as a prompt before you do a short meditation, or ask yourself this question as you enter your daily commute today, or maybe during your next shower. Just clear some space and consider, what do I notice about this decision? Second, if there were no pressure to decide today, what direction feels most natural? Not the most impressive, not the most logical, just the direction that you feel a gentle pull. It may not provide the answer or the whole answer, but it's important to acknowledge what feels true right now. Third, if fear wasn't a part of this equation, what would trusting yourself feel like? How would you know you're on the right path? And finally, when I imagine each possible path, which one feels like expansion and which one feels like contraction? You don't need to rush any of these answers. Intuition rarely shouts, but if you create enough quiet space, it often speaks. Over the past week, we've explored 4 different ways to approach decisions: thinking through them, listening to the body, understanding our emotions, and now our intuition. Different tools for different moments. Because sometimes the mind leads, sometimes the body signals, sometimes emotions illuminate, and sometimes a quiet voice inside simply says, "This way." And the real skill is learning how to listen. I'd love to hear from you. What's been your experience with intuition? What's the wildest decision you've made purely based on your gut? And how did it go for you? And with that, we've come to the end of today's episode on the Contentment Creator channel, where we looked at how to make decisions from our logic, our body, our emotions, and our intuition. Whether you caught the whole episode or one of our segments, either way, thank you so much for making it all the way to the end. And I hope you are subscribed so you don't miss next week's episode. Join me in my mission to turn a world full of content creators into a world of contentment creators. Bye, y'all.